Welcome to the Women's March Canada podcast, making the equality of women in Canada the new norm. This episode is entitled Mothercare and the Fourth Trimester. My name is Leanne Castellino and I'm your host, inspiring, uniting, and leading the charge for the advancement of women across Canada. Please give a warm welcome to this week's guest, Lindsay Forsey. Lindsay is the founder of Tenth Moon Mothercare. Tenth Moon is Canada's first postpartum care package company created by and for moms. Welcome, Lindsay.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So let's start with the name itself. What's the history behind that name?
So the history behind the name of the company, or I guess the story behind the name of the company is if you follow pregnancy by lunar cycles, which are each about 29 and a half days long. Most women will give birth to their babies in the 10th moon. So my company is all about taking care of women and supporting women in that time. So sort of the immediate, right before you have your baby and the time afterwards. And, it's a much more flexible and organic space than, say, the due date that we usually receive when we're expecting, which only about 3% of babies are actually born on their due date. My youngest being one of those babies, actually. So yeah, the 10th moon is the time when we give birth.
So you started this business in 2014. What led you down this path of wanting to become an entrepreneur, and specifically in this space?
Right. So I had my first child in 2011, at the end of 2011. And in the year leading up to that time, I had become a doula. And so I had supported a handful of women in their own birth experiences. And then I was feeling quite confident with my pregnancy, was great, and going into my birth. And we had planned a home birth with our midwives, and everything was great. And then as labor progressed, we ended up transferring to the hospital, not for an emergency reason at that point, but transferring to the hospital for just other reasons. And then as I was nearing the end of my labor, I was feeling ready to push. They realized that my baby was actually breech, and it was her bum that they could feel, not her head coming. And so that really spiraled very quickly into an emergency C-section. My midwife had never had the opportunity to deliver a breech baby, and protocol at hospitals now is that breech babies are born by C-section unless you find one of the very few OBs who are trained and willing to deliver a breech baby. So I ended up having an emergency C-section, and that was obviously, miles away from the birth that I had envisioned. And there were some complications, and it just made my postpartum experience much more difficult than I had expected. And even though I had all of this knowledge and everything else, having been a doula, it did not prepare me for the personal experience of what postpartum would be like and what giving birth would be like. And thankfully for me, by Western standards, typical Western standards, I actually had a very solid postpartum support circle. So I had my partner and my midwives and, some really caring friends who guided me through that time. And when I came through, so sort of that first 3 or 4 months, and was sort of getting my bearings, and the idea came to me of creating something specifically for the needs of the mom. And I also started to become really interested and fascinated by the traditions of mother care that we see in other cultures around the world. And so 10th Moon was really created to specifically look at all of those discomforts and transitions and things that are happening in a woman's body and mind, and when she gives birth, and providing things to help soften that transition and soothe those discomforts, and beyond that, also to just remind people with the women giving birth in particular, that your wellness is so important in this experience. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's so interesting because I'm always fascinated by people who are motivated to start a business based on their own experience. But, being inspired and then becoming an entrepreneur are
Yeah.
two totally different things. And a lot of people don't realize what they've signed up for. So what has, what has sustained you and motivated? I think we know the motivation, but, it takes daily motivation, right?
It takes daily motivation, absolutely. And, I didn't actually start the business until about 2 years later. I started the business when I was just, perfect timing, about a month before I gave birth to my second baby.
Oh, wow.
Great time to start a business. But Tenth Moon has grown really organically. So because of the timing of when I started it, that first year or even 18 months was very much about word of mouth. And, I was in Toronto at the time. I'm now in Hamilton, Ontario. And, I was driving around oftentimes with my own baby and delivering these care packages to women in Toronto who, knew about me through a friend or that sort of thing. I mean, we had a website and, and it was a registered business and all of that thing. So it was a legitimate business, but it was very, organic and word of mouth and sort of slow growth at that time. And then the response from women was just overwhelmingly positive. It was, it was obvious to me that this was something women wanted and women needed. And so that certainly was a motivating factor. And then I started getting requests to send them further. So at first it was just a local delivery service was how it started. And then I had requests to start sending them to a friend. The first one went near Ottawa area. And then I had a request to send one out near Halifax. And so that, again, was like another motivating factor that, that this was something that women across Canada were missing. And I think, in creating 10th Moon, obviously there's the business side of it, and it's also provided a platform to speak about these issues, speak about taboo postpartum issues that nobody wants to talk about, but every woman who's giving birth is experiencing, sometimes with no idea of what to expect. And so 10th Moon has really created a platform for me to be vocal about those things. And as the company has grown and has more of a following and more customers and more people looking to us for information, it's giving a place to start pushing for change now as well.
And what, in your opinion, does that change entail? What are you hoping is going to happen?
Well, first of all, women's health is almost never part of the political platform. Very rarely do we see anything regarding women's health and specifically maternal health as part of the political platform. And it's critical because maternal health affects everyone in the family, and therefore it affects our communities. And just in this past April, the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists released new recommendations for fourth trimester care. The situation with healthcare, obviously in the U.S. is quite different than what we have here in Canada, but we certainly don't have a fourth trimester care program in place here, and I feel that that's really needed. So, currently the system that we have this sort of the 6-week mark where you usually have a very brief check-in, and get the sign off that you're good to go. You're good to get back to exercise, get back to having sex with your partner, and just sort of carry on with things as they were before. but no one's actually doing a pelvic floor examination to see if it's safe for women to get back to exercise. No one's actually, looking to see if this is okay. No one's really doing a proper, mental health or counseling check-in to see how mothers are coping. Mm-hmm. And so those are some of the changes that I think we really need to start incorporating into fourth trimester care for women here that goes beyond 6 weeks. I feel like it should really go even beyond the fourth trimester, say for like the first 6 months after giving birth, where we're actually making sure women are okay.
I think it's so interesting, the timing of when you started your company, because the whole, mental health awareness topic in general in the last, let's say, 4 or 5 years or so, which is within the time that you started your business, is now at the forefront. Do you feel that that has helped expedite you and your mission and the mission and vision of your company?
Well, I think for sure, without question, that the more voices we have together, speaking the same, telling the same stories and pushing towards change, the same sort of changes, it lifts all of us up. So absolutely, it's powerful. And I actually sit on the board of directors for an organization in Toronto called Postpartum Support Toronto. That's one of our part of the mandate within Tenth Moon, and our mission is to support wellness in motherhood in all its manifestations. So, including things like mental wellness and postpartum mood disorders, pregnancy loss, miscarriage and pregnancy loss, and educating and making sure that women understand their bodies and the changes that come with giving birth and becoming a mother, and what's normal and healthy and what's not.
What would you say has surprised you the most in the time that you've started this company, in terms of the people you've met, what you've heard around the whole world of postpartum care? What surprised you?
What surprised me? Well, I guess in some ways, it's like surprising and not surprising at how little some women know about what to expect. And so I can give you an example, and in no way am I saying this in a judging way towards those individuals. I'm saying it as like shame on us for not providing the information in the first place, and making sure that our healthcare professionals are having these conversations with women as their patients. So for an example I can give is I was speaking with a mother who was expecting her baby quite soon. She was about 2 weeks away from giving birth, and we were having a conversation about bleeding postpartum and the need for having pads and what to expect and just all of those things that every woman experiences. But she was under the impression that if she had a C-section, that would not be the case. That was related to having a vaginal birth, which is not the case at all, right? This is something that happens regardless of how we give birth. So, that is surprising to me, in that sense, that we're not doing a good enough job in educating women about their bodies, and that can translate to not just giving birth and motherhood. I think we really need to do a better job of educating women and people in general about their bodies and sexual health and everything else leading up to, as we're young adults and then, as we mature as well.
In your opinion, when do you think that this education of mothers-to-be should ideally occur? Because obviously after they've given birth is potentially too late, because none of us know how we're going to feel after we deliver that baby. So when ideally should they start to be educated about this, just as, as knowledge, having that knowledge in their back pocket?
Well, I think certainly if we're talking about like reproductive health and sexual health, I am very much of the mind that needs to begin happening from a young age, and understanding our bodies and our cycles and our, ovulation and fertility and all of that stuff, I think you can really start quite young. But as far as understanding, what happens postpartum and what to expect in birth, I mean, I think that's really something that we can talk about in pregnancy. I don't know that we necessarily need to get too much focus on that before someone becomes pregnant, because not every woman is going to give birth. Not every woman wants to have children and become a mother, right? So, but absolutely, it needs to be happening before we give birth, and trying to avoid that "I wish someone had told me" scenario.
Finally, Lindsay, what would you say are your top pieces of advice for mothers-to-be, as well as women who are struggling postpartum?
Sure. Well, if you're a mom-to-be, my biggest piece of advice is to spend less time on your birth plan and more time on your postpartum plan. So a postpartum plan is something that is often not even on a family's radar. They're so focused on, like you were saying at the beginning, talking about prenatal classes and eating a healthy diet to, so that you're supporting your body and your baby, and planning your birth, what music you're going to listen to, and comfort measures and all of that stuff, which is great. All of those things are great. But those things will happen. You will give birth to your baby one way or another. And then there's everything else. Then there is, life afterwards with the baby. So making a postpartum plan is really important. And that can include things like preparing, speaking to your family, your friends, your community about who can offer what support during that time, and your partner especially. I mean, communication with your partner, if you have a partner, is the foundation, I think, of postpartum success. And so creating that plan, talking to people who can bring food. Food is like everything after you've given birth. Who can walk your dog? Who can take your other children? If it's, this isn't just about first-time moms. I always like to clarify that new mothers are any mother who's had a baby recently. It's not just a first-time mom. When you have your second baby or your third baby, sometimes you need even more support, because it's not just you and one little baby cuddled in bed all day, breastfeeding or whatever you're doing. You have these other children who need your attention and your care as well. So just really focusing on that. And I also suggest that women try to have a confidant. So one person who you talk to beforehand, and this is especially great for first-time moms, who you can call on without judgment to talk about all of the shit that's going down, because it gets real, right, after we have our babies. And so it's good to have that person. And then if you are a new mom, if you've given birth, you really just want to focus on the top 3 things that I talk about when we're looking at postpartum care and trying to really focus on a woman's wellness. Then is nourishment. So again, food, rest, and time. Those are like the 3 key things that I think need to be the priorities. And when we talk about time, I mean, rest is pretty straightforward, resting as much as you can and not feeling guilty about it. And again, trying to have those arrangements of support people around you so that you can rest. And time, that 6 weeks, to me is like a medical baseline. That is like there should be no pressure at all to feel like you need to bounce back. We focus so much on getting back. Our society focuses so much on the idea of getting back to a former state, rather than honoring and embracing and nurturing what is, right, and finding strength and beauty in those things. So I think giving yourself time, your own timeline, organically. Maybe you don't get back to exercise as you knew it for a year, and that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you need to take your time. I highly recommend checking in with a pelvic floor physiotherapist. I believe that every woman, again, going back to healthcare and changes that we should see for, you know, fourth trimester care, this should be standard healthcare for every person who gives birth should have a pelvic floor examination, because all of these things like, you know, leaking when you're, you know, laughing, or, you know, doing exercise or anything like that is not normal. And it can almost, it's a very, very high success rate of recovery from those types of things if you have the right treatment. And those things can affect a woman's self-confidence. They affect your ability to exercise and lead a healthy lifestyle. It affects your intimate relationship with your partner, so affecting marriages. And so definitely recommend that. And if it's a more mood-related challenge that someone is suffering with or experiencing postpartum, know that you're not alone. It's extremely common. The statistics we have say that about 15% of women will experience postpartum depression or some kind of postpartum mood disorder, but that figure is based on women who reach out for help. So it's generally understood that the numbers are much higher than that, right? Because so many women who experience postpartum mood disorders, there's a spectrum, right? Anxiety, depression, it's not just depression, don't reach out for help and just carry on. So knowing that you're not alone, knowing that there are resources available, talk to a friend, talk to your partner, and look for those resources in your community.
Lots of terrific advice in there. Thank you so much, Lindsay.
Thank you.
Our guest this week has been Lindsay Forsey, who is the president and CEO and founder of Tenth Moon Mothercare. Thank you to everyone who has tuned in to listen. Your comments and questions are always welcomed and encouraged. Please subscribe to our Women's March Canada channel and receive updates every time we upload a new podcast. Our mission across Canada is to stand in solidarity with our partners and children for the protection of our rights, our safety, our health, and our families, recognizing that our vibrant and diverse communities are the strength of our country. This is the Women's March Canada podcast. You can find us on Twitter at Women's March CDA and our website, womensmarchcanada.com. I'm Leanne Castellino. Have a great day.